All right, so hi everybody. Welcome to 99-Day PM Expert Interview Session. 99-Day PM Community is a challenge-based fitness training program for stellar product managers who are committed to getting better every single day. It's a new community where we accomplish learning through product challenges, peer learning, mentor feedback, and expert events just like this one. Our big challenge this week is to derive a product vision given just a big product problem. So we're excited to have our guest today, Lesley Kim Grossblatt, who's the COO and VP of Product at the Board. Welcome, Lesley, and thank you so much for taking time to talk with us today. The BoardList is a curated talent marketplace for business leaders to recommend, discover, and connect highly qualified women for great tech board opportunities. And, Lesley will tell us more about that. But I'll just give a quick intro about Lesley before she can jump in and tell her story. Lesley has had a long career, over 18 years, at companies including Netflix, Intuit, Old School, Nextdoor, and she's built millions of, great products used by millions of small businesses and consumers worldwide. I met Lesley at the Women in Product Conference, where she was a speaker last year at the conference at Facebook. And I was incredibly impressed by Lesley's hustle, especially when she shared stories about how she stumbled into product management just by asking for a product role. Right after that, in the break, I approached Lesley and I was like, oh, let's have a conversation because I'm so impressed with your story. So with that, Lesley, I want to turn it over to you and have you tell us just a little bit about yourself, your story, your career path, how you made your way in. I'm sure we'd all love to hear that.
Sure. So I guess where I can start is I definitely did not have the traditional background to become a product manager or even do anything that I'm doing today, which is sort of, I think, the thread of my career. I went to undergraduate and graduated from college with a degree in English and went right to law school right out of undergrad, and worked for about a year as a lawyer and realized that I think I realized even before I left law school that I wasn't really interested in the law, that I wanted to do something more creative, but I really had no idea what I wanted to do or what kinds of jobs were available. And to give you context and tell you how old I am, this is in the early 90s. So the internet was not even, really ubiquitous yet. There were very, very few people in technology in general and fewer women for sure. So after I spent about a year being a lawyer, I switched kind of roles and went into sales and marketing for a legal publishing company. Enjoyed that a little bit more and started my path to try to find something that would work better for me. I spent some time as a political consultant after doing sales and marketing, which was really, I think, where I learned kind of the basics of marketing and strategy. As a political consultant, what I was doing was really setting the strategic plan for a campaign. How are we going to win? What is the context, looking at data and figuring out a plan for actually getting 50% plus one of the vote. And doing that through a combination of media communications and just operational work. So I did that and I was really enjoying that, but as you can imagine, politics doesn't really pay a lot of money. So we were getting paid less than nonprofit wages at the time. So this is, now about 1998, 99. And, I'm living in San Francisco and I have student loans and I'm making $30,000 a year very worried about my financial future. But anyway, so the internet was really just starting to take off, and I met a guy in San Francisco who had just moved from Boston. He had just graduated from Harvard Law School, and two of his friends from Harvard Business School, and he started an internet startup together while they were still in school. And when they graduated, they got some VC funding and moved to San Francisco. And so I met this guy, my friend who was from Harvard Law School, and he was telling me about his company and what they did. And I was very interested in technology, but I had no background in business or technology. But I was following, obviously, what was going on the internet. Yahoo and companies like eBay were just starting to really find a market. And I thought they were really interesting, and could I do something in that? And I told him one day, I would really love to, work for your company. I don't know what I can do because I don't have any background in what that kind of company does at all. But I work really hard, and I'm pretty smart, and I feel like I can find some way to contribute. And at this time, they were hiring people, like off the street, because they needed so many people to do work. And he was like, yeah, sure, great. We'll hire you. I don't know what you can do either, but you seem like you're pretty smart. You can figure things out. So I started working there. He gave me a job. He was the CTO, and he gave me a job as, they put me in the marketing department, because what I was doing in politics was very similar to marketing. If you think about it, a political campaign in a lot of ways is very similar to marketing campaign. So they put me in marketing for a couple weeks, and then all of a sudden he came to me one day and he says, do you want to be the product manager? Because we had just hired a product manager around the time that I started, and she turned around and she quit very suddenly. And he said, we need a product manager. You want to do it? I said, yeah, sure. What's that? And he hadn't worked at a tech company either, even though he's an engineer. He had been an engineer and went to Harvard Law School. He didn't know anything either, but he was like, I don't know what it is, but the investors say we have to have a product manager, so we need somebody to do it. You want to do it? I was like, okay, cool. We'll figure it out. So neither of us knew what a product manager was supposed to do. But we knew we were supposed to have one. That was it. And again, setting context, this is the very early days of the internet. This wasn't a job that was really a job that people had, like product as a role in a technology company. There were product managers at like packaged good companies like Procter and Gamble. You could be product manager of Crest toothpaste or Tide detergent. Like that made sense. Internet product manager was non-existent. So just by virtue of the place and time in history, I was probably one of the first internet product managers, because it didn't exist, right? It's like we had engineers and we had founders and we had people who were in marketing and sales, like we could figure that part out. But, what is the role of an internet product manager was very unclear. And even more unclear in this company, because none of us had any experience doing it or what we're supposed to know or do. So I was really left to, I was raised by the wolves, so to speak. I had to figure all these things out for myself. Like, okay, I'm supposed to be the product manager. What does that mean? What am I supposed to do? What do product managers do? There weren't forums or books or no one I could talk to.
Yeah.
So I had to just start by figuring out, okay, I have a room full of engineers. They'd hired a bunch of engineers. They don't know what to work on, right? Because they've been given all of these requests from customers, from CEO, from investors. They all want different features, and these engineers don't know what they should work on. Where should they start? Should they do all of these? They don't know what to do. So the first thing I had to figure out.
So you literally hustled and figured it out. I don't want to lose time to hear about, more about like BoardList and how you landed there. So it's so interesting, because I think so many of us who are in product, Kitki's a mentor. I'm not sure how Kitki got her start in product, but all of our journeys are so different, right? And we've been challenged, we hustle. So So I'm seeing the large differences in when you got started and how it is now, when we are here today. But the similarities are so strong. Like we all did something different. None of us got, started as PMs.
Yeah.
And the second thing is that like there's so much unknown still in product. Like growth hacker wasn't a thing, right? A few years back, and then now there's growth hackers. And early stage startups can't hire growth hackers. So the PMs do the growth hacking, the PMs do the data analytics. So do you see that? And how did that play into like where you are today?
Yeah. So what I think is the consistency for the product manager role across the years and through all these different types of companies is that product managers are truly at their heart problem solvers who are really at the nexus of what the customer is doing, right?
Yeah.
And then what the business needs. So the translator and the optimizer for that point where the customer needs and the business needs meet and connect in a very powerful way, right? Because if you think about the role of designers or even engineers, they can be more focused on the customer needs or how does the customer respond to something, and they can be very customer focused. And the marketing and sales can be extremely business focused. Okay, how do we actually get money off this? But there's very few people who really sit at that nexus between what the customer values and what the business values, and tries to coordinate those things and resolve them in a very meaningful way to get this very deep and meaningful result, right? Because we don't want to, as product people, create things where we have fake value. Like we're bringing in millions of users and millions of dollars, but it's not meaningful and it's not sticky. It's like, then we're not succeeding as a product person.
Right.
It has to have the balance of both.
Right.
That it's like it's meeting such an important need or desire for the customer in a way that's truly impactful for them, that they really, it either becomes a part of their daily habit or so ingrained or so delightful,
Yeah.
right, that they're going to keep doing it. And that's going to lead to the great business result. And the flip side, it's like we can't just create great experiences to no business end, right?
Definitely.
And I have a woman I mentor who is breaking into PM right now, and she just went through a design boot camp, and she was stunned, like, wow, when we were working on projects together in the boot camp, the people were just so concerned about like, oh, this is a great feature, or this is great because it looks cool, or it's like really novel. It's like, but what's the meaningfulness of that? Like,
value, right?
Yeah, what's the value?
Right.
And it was, because her introduction to product has been through me before she went to this boot camp, where I'm very customer focused, and I'm always asking like, okay, how does that translate to the business? Like, we have customers, we have business, how does that work together? She was very stunned that there are people who don't think that way.
Right.
And so I found that surprising too. Like, wow.
So if I can, let's jump into like the BoardList. Tell us a little bit about like, and I understand that you just, even the BoardList role, just like you've done in the past, you literally picked it up and you said, like, this is a great need. And, how about I take this on as like my problem or my vision, right?
Mm-hmm.
But I want to hear your perspective on, why did you choose that? Like, and what is the vision of BoardList and what are you trying to accomplish?
Well, the BoardList was founded by this woman, Sukhinder Singh Cassidy, who is a multi-time CEO, and she used to be president at Google for their Latin America and Asia operations. And this was her passion project, right, to try to get more women onto boards. And very early on, she had this idea, like, I want to have some kind of technology solutions driven approach. She's not a technologist. Her background is in business development and sales, before she was a CEO. So, but she knew she wanted to see a more of a product thinking and technology thinking perspective to solve the problem rather than just talk about it. Mm-hmm. And so she had started telling people she was looking for a product person, and we have a mutual friend who reached out to me on her behalf and said, you know, I know this woman, she's working, she wants to do something around women on boards, you know, are you interested? And this is the thing, it's like, it's not always about inventing an opportunity for yourself. It's about having your eyes open to a possibility for an opportunity that you wouldn't have realized or thought of on your own. Because at the time when I was approached, I was working at a job. I had taken a job with a really great startup where I really wanted to work at that company, but they didn't have a product role for my level. But they said, we really want to hire you. And so, you know, can you do this kind of combination of mostly operations, community, and you can do a little bit of product. And I took the role because I wanted to work at that startup so bad. But what I realized when I was working there is I really missed doing product and building things. And so I'm not actually that happy with my choice as far as I took this role just to be in this company because it was a hot company. Like if I'm not doing what's meaningful to me personally, it doesn't matter how hot or great this company is.
Right.
That's not what I'm about.
Then what was it about BoardList? You know, was there a drive towards the vision? You know, I'm very driven towards like the whole women, you know, the mission of getting more women out there. So what played into that?
Well, it was really two things, right? So here I am in this job where I'm not super happy, and I'm realizing that it's more important to me what I'm actually doing, right? And then I have this opportunity come along where somebody tells me there's this, you know, person who's trying to build something to help women on boards, women in tech, and it's like, okay, that's an area of personally I care deeply about, and I've experienced a lot of sexism, and especially now that I mentor a lot of younger women, I see that, right? And I'm like, we got to do something about that. And then even more importantly, in some ways to me was like, oh, and she wants to build something. Like I want to get to building stuff again, right? Yeah. And so seeing that opportunity, it was easy enough for me to say, you know, I wasn't ready to leave my job yet, but I said, okay, I'll help you. I want to help you. I'll work, you know, a few hours a week and help you. And then once I got into it, it became really clear, you know, there were a lot of big ambitions and things that we could be doing. Like if we really wanted this thing to have the impact that we all want to see, there's a lot more work to be done. And I just kind of, you know, my boss Sukhinder started interviewing some people to run the board list, and she was asking me what I thought about them. And I was kind of like, wow, why doesn't she ask me to do it? Does she think I can't do it? Right? And so I set a meeting with her, and I said, I want to talk to you about stuff. And I said, you know, I'm not really that into my job. Do you want me to work on this full time? Because I can quit my other job. I'm not that beholden to it. And she was like, oh, I'm so relieved. Like, what are you talking about? She's like, I thought this conversation was going to be about like, you don't want to work, you know, you don't want to work on this anymore. You like your job. You can't take time away. Like, I thought you were really into your job and you would never work full time on this. And the lesson there is really, you know, you don't know unless you actually say something, right?
Yeah.
Because she was making some assumptions about me, and I was making some assumptions about her, right? About the situation. That she's not asking me because she thinks I can't do it. No, she's not asking me because she thinks she sees I have a full-time job at a hot startup, and maybe I want to stay there.
That's great. But you said something that's really interesting to me. You said the first few weeks there, you understood that it's an opportunity to make impact, and it's a long way. You know, there's a lot of things that need to get done. So tell us a little bit, and really because this week we're focused on taking like a big problem, right? And building a vision from it, which means validating that there is an opportunity here to make an impact. There is a need here, and then we'll build something to solve that. And then you start on that journey to see what works, right? What did that look like for the board list?
Well, the board list really started from a very simple premise, which is, look, there's this huge, you could take this gigantic problem and say there's a huge problem of there's not enough women on boards, right? In public companies, it's maybe 20% of seats are held by women. In private companies, it's even less, under 10%. by our estimates. So you can say like, okay, there's a really huge opportunity, a really huge problem, and therefore an opportunity to have an impact. Where a lot of things have been stalled out before is people didn't take the next step of like, well, how do you actually change that? Right? A lot of people had taken the step of raising the visibility of the problem and saying there's a problem. But you have to take a first step. So how do you actually solve the problem? And where we really started from was the BoardList was saying, okay, that's a problem. Let's start to break it down and try to understand the problem. Why is that number low? Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And there's a few different reasons that we can control and some that we can't. For example, one of the major reasons is board seats don't turn over that frequently. So even if you wanted to bring in women or somebody different, they just don't turn over very frequently. Okay, not a lot we can do about that. What is something we can do if we understand? So we looked at the decision-making process and how do people decide when there is an open board seat, who gets on the seat, and try to understand the decision-making and the thought process for the actual decision makers, and then take a first step and say, well, when there's an open board seat, these folks the first thing they'll do is they'll reach out to like 2 or 3 very trusted peers and ask for recommendation for who they want. Do you know anyone who would be good for my board? They don't go post this on the internet somewhere. A lot of them don't even work with recruiters, right? It's like very, very small network and very trusted recommendation. So we said, take that kernel of truth and say, this is very recommendation driven by somebody whose judgment you trust, someone you perceive as a peer. Well, let's start from there. Let's say, let's make a collection of everybody's, all the people who are on boards and CEOs, who do they think are awesome women, right? And create a first step and say, okay, let's find some people whose judgment other board members would trust and say, okay, we have a very specific platform. We want to know, tell us the names of like 5 women that you think are great for board.
You're basically bringing that core network online, and then you're expanding that recommendation-based network.
Absolutely.
Your hypothesis there is that because that's the part of the process you can control, you want to impact, there's an opportunity to impact the numbers there.
Right.
Hence, like impact your final KPI of getting more women on board.
Right. And so
how's that going?
Yeah, I mean, it's been really well received and it's going very well. I mean, it's in the first year and a half, we've had over 1,200 of these business leaders, they're men and women, who have recommended nearly 2,000 board-ready women into the BoardList. And we've had over 280 companies use us as a resource to help identify female candidates for their board seats. So
how many of us?
Over 200. It's over 280. It's like 282 or something like that. Right. And we've had influence over the placement of about 61. I think now it's more like 63 board seats that have been filled. So we've been a resource for them in one way or another. So the success has been very good. But you're talking about having a really big problem and tackling a really big problem. The important learning, I think, from the BoardList and some other things that I've worked on is to really understand the problem from as multiple perspectives as you can, so you can really parse out what are things that can be controlled versus things that you can influence with a behavioral change, right? Yes. So there are some things that are systemic that you can't move, and if you could, yes, you could, but it might require a lot, like even government intervention or something. Yeah.
Right? Yeah.
Right.
And that was the first thing you want to take on.
Right.
Versus like some other ideas.
Yeah. And I know we're running short on time, but I'll give you a completely non-BoardList example of this. And it's not even one that I worked on, but I had an interview once when I was interviewing for my job at Netflix. My boss was giving me this case and he's like, well, we want to expand to Canada. They have bandwidth caps. Like if you use too much bandwidth on your phone, you have to pay a lot more money. And we went to Canada and people were going over their limits and they were paying all this money. And it was like, oh my God, this is so terrible. What can we do? And he said, well, what would you do to solve that? And I would say, and I came back and said, well, how do you know, he was saying, if we keep it slower and lower quality, we can keep under the bandwidths. And so I said, well, how do you know that people even know there's a difference between the low bandwidth and the lower bandwidth and the higher bandwidth is pushing them up? Yeah. And he goes, exactly, right? Like first we should figure out if there's even a perceptible difference because we're promoting this high bandwidth, but if people are happy with lower,
if that's not creating the value,
right, right. But here's what the lesson was, though, because I said, and he said to me, surprised, you are the first person I've interviewed who has said that. And he has been interviewing all of these very senior product people, and I'm like, what? Really? What did they suggest doing? And he said most people said they would try to figure out how to remove the bandwidth caps, how to get the mobile phone carriers to not charge people for this. And the point in the lesson there is when you have a very big problem like that, don't try to look at it from as many perspectives as you can and really figure out what you can influence and what you cannot influence or is going to be really hard to influence. So taking that step and really starting with where you can get a win.
It looks like that comes naturally to you, but tell me, is there like a technique? Is there like a brainstorming technique, to step back and really look at everything? Is there a hack you recommend? With that situation or any situation, to build that sort of intuition.
Yeah, I think one of the things is to really have discipline when you're looking at a problem. It's so easy to think, okay, this is what it is, and just start running with that, right? And that's great for really straightforward small problems. But when you're really talking about big, systemic, intractable problems, and those are the kinds we're talking about this week, right? Those are really gnarly ones. It's like if it was that easy to solve, it would have been solved by now. So to respect the complexity inherent in the big problem and be humble in the face of that and say, okay, this is a big problem because there are probably many, many parts to it. So let's really figure out like who all has impact over this and how does this whole thing, what are all the situations? And you can do this quickly. You don't need to spend months and months doing it, but force yourself to be very disciplined in your thinking and say like, have I really given this problem the respect that it deserves?
That's great. That's great because it's just a matter of perspective, right? With that, you come at it differently. So yes, in the interest of time, I want to ask Manaz, and I think there's one more person on the call. If they have any questions for you.
Thanks so much. Lesley, I have a question. That you came from a law background, from law school. What are the challenges over the years that you've experienced not having a technical background, and how did you deal with that? Or did you actually go back and start learning certain technologies that would help you in your role?
Very good question, and one of my pet peeves about where product has been going in the last few years, which is this notion of the technical product manager. And I don't believe that is a real thing. And here's why. It's the product manager, because we're cross-functional, we have to work with people who are in all sorts of different functions, right? We have to work with designers, data people, engineers. We have to be able to understand what they do, right? At a level where we are a good translator. But I don't need to be an engineer. I don't necessarily need to know how to code unless I'm going to work at a company like Google where that is a job requirement for a product manager. But then I think it's a different job. The very so in my career, I started ever since my first job as a product manager. You know, when I was sitting in the room full of engineers trying to figure out what they have to do, I spent a lot of time with them trying to understand what they were doing and trying to understand what they're talking about. So, you know, I don't need to have a degree in like network ops or databases or something, but I need to be able to understand generally how they work, right? And I need to be curious, because if I'm not curious, then I'm missing opportunities. It's the same thing we're talking about with the big problem and being really respectful of the complexity of it, right? And saying like, okay, I don't know these things. I need to know enough so that we can converse and have a meaningful discussion. And you as an engineer can explain to me what some of the trade-offs are and the challenges are and the opportunities. You might see that, wow, there's a totally different way we can do this. Like, okay, great. Because what I'm looking for are solutions and answers, right? From customers, from engineers, from everybody all the time. So, I think it's been very unfair to a lot of people, especially women who want to be in product, this growth of this notion of the technical product manager, because what it's doing is the more people who buy into that, the more women are going to be excluded, right? Because just by numbers, there are not as many women who have an engineering degree. And it's like, if you want an engineer, hire an engineer.
Right. So
right?
You're saying you didn't go and get do any course, like do anything. You really were curious, right?
Yeah.
And that's so important, you know, Manaz. I have to jump in and tell you that even though I have a technical background, there's so many things that I just don't know, right? When I'm sitting with an engineer.
Right.
I just have to be curious and I have to learn. There's so much I know. And
right.
so much I don't. And I think my humility and curiosity are two biggest things I can bring to the room, because
right.
engineers can get really offended, or like they, you know, I can't even act like I know what they're talking about. Like I have to be respectful. At the same time, be curious and accept that I don't know the things that I don't know. So that's great. That's great. Does that answer your question, Naz?
Yes, that's very helpful from both of you. Thank you.
Great. So I think there's Christina. Any other questions from people who are logged in?
Christina posted a question on the Facebook page as a comment.
Oh, she did. Okay, let me look. What's your thought? Oh, I believe this is the question, right? Oh, yes, we have a couple of questions. So what are your thoughts on applying for a role that works closely with product in order to get into the door of a startup? Christina has experience as an APM, but you know, it's a very competitive space. So she wonders if she should just apply for a role that's close to product.
Yeah, I think that's a challenge, right? Because I've seen where it works out well and I've seen where it doesn't. So in my example where I went to work at that hot startup and I was like, they didn't have product role for me, but they were like, we like you and want you to work here. We'll give you this other thing where you'll be doing a little bit of product. And, you know, I was even co-reporting to the VP of product, but I wasn't doing product, right? And there wasn't a path for me to actually get onto the product team. It wasn't going to happen. There wasn't space for me. And it's like, but they would like me enough to make this sideways place. And if I had been a different person, maybe that would have been fine and I would have been okay with that. So it didn't work for me, right? But I have had, for example, I had a woman I mentored when I was working at Netflix who came out of the customer support organization. And she was just really, really smart, hardworking, and very curious and always stretching herself. And she told me she wanted to be a PM someday. And I said, you know, I think you really have what it takes. And let's really have you be my product liaison to the customer support team. And she really started from there as far as, being the one who was like collecting, like, here's all the customer feedback and translate.
Lesley, I'm so sorry. We might lose the call.
Oh.
I want to say thank you before we lose you abruptly.
Yes.
But this has been so good. We'll have to have you on again after we have feedback, and I'm sure we'll have a lot more questions for you, once I post this in the group.
And I'll be happy to answer the questions on Facebook. So.
Oh, that's great. That's great. And we'll do that. We'll do that. I really apologize, but we're way over time. I want to be respectful of your time and thank you properly. So thank you so much.
Thanks for having me on.
Great. Thank you, Lesley. Have a great day.
You too.
Bye.
Bye, everybody.
Thanks. Bye.